Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to the latest installment of my new album Spotlight series, where I spotlight a brand new prog album that I believe deserves attention and notice in the prog community and that I've been loving, so hopefully you guys will appreciate this one, and please subscribe if you haven't yet if you're interested in hearing about all the greatest in prog music and getting reviews and of course weekly prog news as well on my Friday shows. I'd love to have you guys on board. But for today I'm talking about the new Tangent album, Songs from the Hard Shoulder. Now the Tangent is a group that I've loved since their inception back in the early 2000s with the music that died alone. It was kind of a big seminal album for me as I was discovering prog music. This was one of the first new bands I discovered, Spock's Beard, Flower Kings, Transatlantic, that kind of world. But this was me branching out slightly into something. Of course, it did feature members of Flower Kings, which is what initially sparked me into it. But it kind of was its own thing and was exploring different musical horizons, more into this Canterbury and jazz kind of influences, along with the established symphonic prog influences from the heroes of like Yes and Genesis and all of that stuff. Some atmospheric things like Pink Floyd, some King Crimson-esque kind of instrumental stuff, and all of that stuff into this kind of cool mixing pot that really spoke to me at the time and just really made a big impact on me when that album arrived, and I was just so enamored with it, and I've been following the group ever since and loving all of their albums. Very prolific group that come out with albums almost every year, every other year. They've come out with 12 albums in the span of that time frame, and this is their 12th album, and it's really a great listen, and I strongly recommend it to all prog fans out there. I've really been enjoying it. The album is called Songs from the Hard Shoulder. Basically, kind of the theme behind the title is the hard shoulder is basically the breakdown lane on the freeway. I listened to Andy Tillison kind of describe some of the lyrics and the themes behind the album, and he talks about how this is the breakdown lane of the freeway where you kind of see the world go past you as you're broken down in that lane. And so the songs kind of resemble that kind of aesthetic of being a little bit broken down, kind of halted in your progress a little bit, kind of beaten down and watching things go past you. So that's the basic theme behind the album. But what we've got here is just a fantastic group of kind of these bigger length epic songs that are really great and well constructed. The lineup for this album is Andy Tillison, as mentioned, on vocals and keyboards. He's kind of the main brainchild behind the band and has been with the band from the inception. He's been kind of the mastermind and creator of this project and kind of the steady hand that has followed the group throughout the years, and writes all these pieces and has such a great artistic vision that he brings forward through this music. He's joined by Luke Machin on vocals and guitars, Theo Travis, saxophone and flute, Jonas Reingold on bass, and Steve Roberts on drums. A great lineup that's they're really kind of establishing themselves. Throughout the years they kind of had various members come in and out, but now I feel like on the last few albums they're really kind of narrowing in on a very solid lineup. I believe this is the same lineup that was on their previous album, Auto Reconnaissance. So what we've got here is just a great diverse mix of sounds and styles that's put into these there's 3 epic pieces and then 1 shorter track at the end of the album, but the epic pieces, going through them one by one, we've got The Changes, which is 17 minutes long, that opens the album, and this is just like classic great Tangent music. They do so well at these epic pieces that go through so many different changes and switch ups, and it kind of stays rooted, this one, in kind of a jazzy groove and feel. There's some great harmony vocals that kind of accentuate kind of that jazziness. There's some funk, there's some jazz fusion, some Canterbury kind of styles, some jazzy scatting, some kind of these multi-part harmonies, but it really goes through a lot of different moods and movements throughout the music. It makes sense that there's a lot of changes and different styles in the music because the track is called The Changes. And basically what this song is about the COVID era, the lockdown phase, where people were, of course, locked into their homes and not able to basically go out and socialize and do the things that they were used to doing. And it was a difficult period for a lot of people. They felt very isolated and alone and weren't able to go out and do the things that they're used to doing. And I'm sure that's especially difficult for musicians who are used to being together as a band and playing together and doing these things and sharing these memories. And part of the song kind of goes into a little bit of a memory of the band and them being together and touring and all of this stuff, touring with Car Mechanic and having these experiences. It's basically Andy Tillison kind of looking through photos and reminiscing on those times where they were together and able to associate. But now, of course, in the thick of the lockdown, it's kind of, you feel guilty. You can't really go out and be around people because you could infect them, and you have to kind of stay isolated and alone, and it's difficult. But what's cool about the track is that it kind of ends in a message of hope. It's actually a very hopeful track, even though it's covering kind of a depressing, darker situation. It's kind of like, well, things are changing. Let's get out of that lockdown mode and get back to our normal lives. And basically, there were a lot of negatives about the world before the lockdown. Maybe this is our chance to kind of have a fresh start and to kind of put aside some of those negatives and kind of embrace this change, embrace this kind of new chance to come out and be able to socialize again and be with people and live your life the way you want to. So it kind of reframes the pandemic and the lockdowns as a way to kind of change yourself and to come back into the world with new perspective based on what you went through. So I think that's really positive and uplifting, and the music really personifies that, especially towards the end with the great keyboard solo and a guitar solo, which really brings a classic vibe to the sound and really has this kind of soaring, great finale to it. The second track, the GPS Vultures, is a fantastic 17-minute instrumental track that just goes through so many different things. This is really the most eclectic grab bag of a track that they've probably ever done. It goes through jazz fusion, avant-garde kind of stuff, atmospheric, has touchstones to Return to Forever, Van der Graaf Generator. It has almost this kind of like flamenco acoustic kind of style guitar and Latin grooves and all of this kind of stuff that just really morphs and changes throughout the piece. But it's really expertly composed, because even though it goes through so many changes and almost feels like random and there's so many different things going on, you can tell that there's a specific journey that you're meant to go on with the music, which is what I really appreciate about The Tangent and Andy Tillison's writing, that there's a direction it's taking you in, there's a purpose to it. It's not just random notes and just like, let's just go crazy. There's soloing, there's kind of improvisation and all of this kind of cool stuff going on, but there's a structure and a purpose to the song, and it's heading somewhere. What's cool about this piece is that it's kind of based upon their previous track, GPS Culture, which was from A Place in the Queue. And so it's based on kind of similar chord structures and shapes that were part of that track, but taking it in a new direction and doing different things with it. So it's cool that they can kind of build upon their history and give little kind of touchstones to things that they've covered in their past. I kind of like that stuff. As a fan of the band, it's fun to have these little Easter eggs of like, oh yeah, that's from that track, that's from that thing. And they do that expertly well. And I really love these instrumental pieces that they're doing. They did one on, I believe it was Slow Rust of Forgotten Machinery, called Dr. Livingston, I presume, which is much in the same kind of style as this. Really was one of the highlights of that album, so I'm really happy they're continuing to do these kind of expansive instrumental tracks. They're kind of a lot of fun. But that leads us into track 3, The Lady Tied to the Lamppost, which is probably the most serious and important track on the album in a lot of ways, because this deals with the situation of homelessness, and basically the story behind it is Andy Tillison. This is based on a real experience that he had, where he found a homeless woman who was tied to a lamppost, basically because she didn't want to fall over at night and hurt herself, so this was her mechanism to be able to stay upright and to keep herself somewhat safe, even though she was living in these horrible conditions. And it's kind of a reflection from Andy Tillison about that situation, about how awful homelessness can be, to not have a place to be able to go to be in that type of situation. And what's really interesting to me about these lyrics is that it's basically Andy, he goes away from this encounter and starts thinking of a song and lyrics and how to write this music. And it's almost a reflection upon that of like, of course this music isn't really going to help her. She's still out there and experiencing this terrible thing. While I'm kind of being able to create this music and get this out there and have a home to go back to, in a studio and all that kind of stuff, she's still tied out there, experiencing this terrible situation. So it's an interesting reflection on that situation. I thought really cool autobiographical kind of experience, and kind of continuing from there about how when a car's broken down on the side of the freeway, there's people there to help you. You're able to save these broken down cars, but why can't we save these kind of broken down people who are homeless and they're in the streets and suffering? So it's a good reflection on what to do in that kind of situation. Is there something we can do that's more proactive rather than just going off and writing a song about it? What can we do as a world to kind of solve this situation? And I think it's a really great reflection and really interesting lyrical development as it goes through the song. The Tangent always does this. They're always able to analyze things and bring kind of politics into the music, and I think it really allows for a lot of great reflection. And the music that goes behind this is really interesting and varied. It's a little bit moodier and darker. I feel like it starts kind of mournful and slow, but then it builds up into kind of some frenetic paced music, and still goes through their signature kind of style of going through several different time signatures and styles, and has some jazzier sections and some harder, heavier sections, but it still keeps that mood that kind of pervades throughout the piece that I think is important, that really showcases the seriousness of the situation and what they're discussing. So it's really interesting dichotomy where I'm really fascinated and interested by the music. It's fun and varied and has a lot going around, but I still stay rooted in this kind of darker, deeper story and subject matter that I think is really important to discuss and to think about. So really a cool piece of music that maybe is the highlight of the record. I love all the tracks. They're all highlights in their own regards, but this is one that really stood out to me as something special and important that Andy Tillison really wanted to say and to get out there. So definitely a really recommended piece of music to listen to. And then finally it ends with Wasted Soul, which is kind of a light poppier R&B style track, kind of very different than the three tracks that preceded it, where there are all these big expansive epics that go through all these different movements and directions, and then Wasted Soul just leaves you with kind of a small slice of kind of R&B style pop with some funky horns and some really cool grooves to it, which I think is kind of fun. It leaves you kind of on a higher note after kind of a darker piece of music, and kind of is almost the palate cleanser to kind of leave you with a good taste in your mouth as you leave the album. And there's also a bonus track that's featured as well on many different versions of the release, at least a cover version of In the Dead of Night by UK, which they do a really fantastic job here. They kind of keep it pretty straightforward, similar to the original at first, and then they kind of go off in their own direction and kind of explore different soundscapes and different feels in the music in between before they reprise that kind of opening section of the song. So really cool, and a cool little bonus feature. Really provides a good ending to this massive project that I think's really strong. So really great music. I really like this album. It's my favorite probably since Proxy, which I really liked as well. I think it's really strong writing, a lot of cool variation in the music. It never loses your interest, and it goes through so many different styles and change-ups between jazz and Canterbury and symphonic prog and all of the different styles in between. It's just a really fun listen, but also has something to say that's worthwhile, and I think that's the best kind of music that marries those two things. That it's a fun and varied listen with a lot of complexity and forethought into the music, but also has something interesting and important to say in the lyrics. And I think Andy Tillison really marries that perfectly on all of his albums, but on this one especially. So thank you guys for joining me. I hope you appreciated that review, and that you guys will go out and check this album. I'm really excited about it. I think it's a great album that's up there amongst the best of the year, so really highly recommended from me if you like this style of prog. And I'm just really excited to keep listening and uncovering hidden depths, because when you get this complex, cool music, that's one of the cool features. There's always more to explore and to dig out and to find the little hidden references and things. And it's just such a joy, and I'm thankful for Andy Tillison and all the musicians involved for giving me these little puzzles to solve and to enjoy throughout my listening experience. So thank you guys so much, and hopefully I'll catch you all in another video. So thank you, and bye.